April 15, 1945. British tanks smash through the iron gates of Bergen-Belsen. A commander lifts the hatch. He expects a military objective. He finds a graveyard. The spring air should smell of pine and rain. Instead, it carries the sweet, thick stench of rotting flesh. 13,000 corpses lay unburied under the sun. 60,000 skeletal figures crawl through the mud. It is the population of an entire city, dying in unison from typhus and hunger. How do ordinary people turn into architects of such a nightmare? Among the mountains of dead, 3 young women in tailored SS uniforms walk with terrifying calm. Irma Grese, Elisabeth Volkenrath, Wanna Bormann. They are in their early 20s. Grese adjusts her whip. Her hair is perfect. Prisoners call her the beautiful beast. She is 22 years old. 1 year ago, these women were not killers. They were hairdressers, farm girls, practical nurses. Now they are professional sadists who have mastered the art of human degradation. The British soldiers stare from their turrets. They see the piles of bodies and the women who presided over them. The scale of the crime is a physical blow. 13,000 corpses under the open sky. The soldiers remain in their tanks. No one cheers. No one speaks. The only sound is the idling of diesel engines in the heavy, poisoned air. December 1944. A train pulls into the siding at Bergen-Belsen. Josef Kramer steps onto the platform. He is 39 years old, thick brows, a reputation for cold, mechanical efficiency. He arrives from Auschwitz-Birkenau. Behind him, the smoke of the crematoria is still settling. But Kramer did not travel alone. He brought a hand-picked team of professionals, experts in misery. Among them was Elisabeth Volkenrath. She was 25 years old. Where did they find such people? 2 years earlier, Volkenrath was a hairdresser in Silesia. By 1942, she was training at Ravensbrück. By 1944, she was the head wardress at Auschwitz. She climbed the ranks through the stench of the gas chambers. Survivors remembered her hands. Those hands once styled hair. Now they signed death warrants. Volkenrath stood at the selections. A flick of her wrist decided who worked and who died. She supervised 3 hangings personally. She beat prisoners with the casual indifference of someone swatting a fly. The Soviet army forced a retreat. Auschwitz was evacuated. In February 1945, Volkenrath arrived at her new post. She brought the technology of systematic murder to Bergen-Belsen. Irma Grese was 21 years old. At an age when most were starting university, she governed the lives of 30,000 women. She didn't just manage them, she owned them. Grese grew up on a dairy farm. She left school at 15. By 1942, she was at Ravensbrück. That was her training ground. Senior guards there taught her a simple lesson. Prisoners are not human. Violence is not a choice. It is a requirement. She refined her methods. She designed her own tools. The whip was a masterpiece of cruelty. Woven leather, a custom grip. She had the entire length wrapped in transparent cellophane. Why? So the blood wouldn't soak in. So the spray of red would wash off with a single wipe. She walked the rows of the camp. Perfect blonde hair, innocent blue eyes, a face that belonged on a propaganda poster. Contrast was her true weapon. Survivors remembered the angel of Auschwitz for her beauty. They remembered her for the addiction that followed. She didn't just follow orders, she ignored them. When the commandant told her to stop the beatings, she refused. She was hooked on the rush of the strike. She lived for the moment of impact. A flick of the wrist decided who breathed and who stayed in the dirt. Grese took her custom-made whip and stepped onto the transport headed for Bergen-Belsen. The whip changed hands. Irma Grese moved on, but another figure took her place in the hierarchy of pain. Johanna Bormann. At 52, she was the veteran, the oldest in the dock. Her past didn't fit the profile. Before 1938, Bormann was a missionary, deeply religious, a woman of God. She joined the SS at 45 for a simple reason: better pay. For 7 years, she climbed the ladder of the camp system. Lichtenberg, Ravensbrück, Auschwitz, Hindenburg. By March 1945, The missionary arrived at Bergen-Belsen. She didn't need a whip. She had a German shepherd. The mechanism was simple. Bormann stood still. She gave a short command. The dog lunged. Survivors remembered the sight of the massive wolfhound sinking teeth into emaciated legs. It dragged women through the mud. It stripped flesh from bone. Bormann didn't look away. She watched with visible satisfaction. At least 2 deaths were officially recorded from these attacks. The actual number is lost. No one was left to count the bodies in the dirt. 18,000 dead in 31 days. In March 1945, Bergen-Belsen stopped being a camp and became a conveyor belt of biological decay. The policy was simple: cram tens of thousands into a space meant for hundreds. Stop the food, cut the water. Why did the death toll skyrocket in March? The front lines were collapsing. The Nazis evacuated camps in the east and drove the survivors westward. Bergen-Belsen was the drain where they all collected. By March, the population hit 45,000. The infrastructure snapped. The barracks were a landscape of filth. Prisoners lay on top of each other, skin against bone. The floor was a thick layer of excrement and mud. A constant wet cough echoed through the wooden walls. It drowned out speech. It replaced silence. The camp began as a POW site in 1940. First the French, then the Belgians. In 1941, the Soviet prisoners arrived. 14,000 of them died within a year. They died from starvation and the cold. By 1943, the SS took full control. They turned neglect into a weapon of mass destruction. Typhus ripped through the crowded huts. There was no medicine, no clean water, only the smell of rot and the sound of the dying. The guards didn't need bullets, they just waited. In that single month, 18,000 people perished. 600 funerals every day if anyone had the strength to bury them. 25 deaths every hour. In March 1945, the Third Reich was a hollow shell. But inside the wire of Bergen-Belsen, the collapse of the system only accelerated the slaughter. As Germany burned, Irma Grese and her inner circle retreated into a private world of sadism. Their priority wasn't survival, it was potato peels. 2 sisters found a handful of scraps in the dirt. Grese didn't just punish them, she grabbed them by the hair and smashed their skulls together. Nearby, she spotted a young girl moving too slowly. Grese drew her riding crop and whipped the child until the girl stopped screaming. She forced dying women to perform squats and jumping jacks in the mud. They collapsed. She kept hitting them. Elisabeth Volkenrath patrolled the work details. She watched the lines of skeletal figures. If a prisoner stumbled, Volkenrath stepped in. She selected the weakest for immediate removal. No medical reason, just a cold eye for the exhausted. Johanna Bormann spent her mornings at the pigsty. The animals were fat and well fed. A few yards away, prisoners were eating grass and leather. Bormann found a group of women too sick to stand. She didn't call a doctor. She whistled for her dog. The beast tore into flesh that was already rotting from typhus. The front line was miles away. The guards could hear the British artillery, yet between March and April 1945, the torture never paused. The addiction to power had replaced the chain of command. They continued to beat, starve, and kill until the very last hour. A white flag flickered against the gray April sky. On one side, mountains of unburied corpses. On the other, the roar of the 11th Armored Division. 15th of April, 1945. Major Dick Williams leaned out of his tank. He expected a battle. He found a truce. The German command had a single priority: stop the typhus. They didn't want the epidemic crossing the front lines. To the SS, the dying prisoners were no longer enemies. They were biological waste. The engines cut. The silence was worse. British soldiers stepped off their vehicles and immediately hit a wall of stench. It was thick, sweet, rotten. Battle-hardened men, survivors of Normandy, turned away to vomit. The contrast was a physical blow. On one side, Joseph Kramer stood calm. The beast of Belsen wore a clean uniform. He followed protocol. He offered a professional surrender, like one officer to another. On the other side, the living skeletons. Williams saw movement in the mud. Prisoners tried to stand. They took 2 steps toward the tanks and collapsed. Some didn't even try. They crawled on raw knees. Thousands just lay there, eyes open, waiting for the end to arrive in a British uniform. Kramer had stayed behind to maintain order. He wasn't alone. While most male guards vanished into the woods, the women held their posts. Irma Grese, Elisabeth Volkenrath, Johanna Bormann. They stood among the dying with polished boots and cold eyes. The soldiers moved past the gates. They ignored the German protocols. A group of British infantrymen broke off from the main column and headed straight for the female SS sector. The British infantry moved through the female sector. They found Irma Grese. She wasn't hiding. She stood there with her whip still in her hand. Did she understand the war was over? Witness accounts describe her as arrogant. When an officer stepped into a hut, Grese lunged at him. The British slammed her down. They restrained her and dragged her out. Within days, the tally reached 70. 70 SS guards and capos were pulled from the wreckage of the camp. The British moved them to the Wehrmacht tank school 3 kilometers away. Interrogations began. Survivors who could still speak told their stories. They spoke of systematic torture and calculated murder. The British realized they weren't just holding guards, they were holding some of the worst criminals of the regime. But the women didn't see it that way. Their moral compass was gone. Many believed they would be released after a few questions. They were just following orders. Grese took it further. She didn't expect a noose, she expected a spotlight. While the British documented the corpses, Grese spent her time fixing her hair for the camera. She thought these were portraits for the society pages. She expected fame, not a trial. The delusion was total. They waited for an audience to hear their side. They genuinely believed the world would admire their discipline. The awakening began in September. On September 17, 1945, the doors of the courtroom in Lüneburg opened. Each defendant wore a white card with a large black number pinned to their chest. It was a cold sorting system for a courtroom. Number 1. Joseph Kramer, the Beast of Belsen. Number 7. Elisabeth Volkenrath. Number 9. Irma Grese. On September 17, 1945, the Belsen Trial began in Lüneburg. 45 defendants crammed onto the wooden benches of the dock. The wood creaked under the weight of 32 men and 13 women. They looked like ordinary people in a crowded room, but the world was watching. Over 100 journalists from across the globe filled the gallery. How did they plan to prove the impossible? The British military tribunal focused on Bergen-Belsen and Auschwitz. The charges were concise: murder and systematic torture. Colonel T.M. Backhouse led the prosecution. He didn't need metaphors, he had survivors. For 2 months, the scale of the horror unfolded in daily sessions. One by one, the prosecutors walked into the room to face the numbers. The wooden benches of the dock groaned under 45 defendants. They sat in silence. Their own crimes, once whispered in the mud of the camps, were now read aloud in a British court. Volkenrath watched the witnesses. These women were no longer numbers, they were accusers. One survivor stepped forward to describe the selections at Auschwitz. Volkenrath stood next to Dr. Joseph Mengele. She didn't flinch while he pointed left or right. To her, sending 1,000 women to the gas chambers was as casual as sorting mail. She oversaw the hangings. She broke those who worked too slowly. But the testimony against Irma Grese hit harder. The courtroom heard of the whip, the dogs, the jealousy. Was there a limit to her cruelty? Not according to the survivors. Grese selected the most beautiful prisoners for death simply because she hated their faces. Helena Copper took the stand. She had seen the punishment detail firsthand. Grese didn't just manage the unit, she turned it into a slaughterhouse. Copper testified that Grese was responsible for at least 30 deaths every single day. The torture was precise. Grese forced dying women to stand for hours in the sun. They had to hold heavy stones high above their heads. When their muscles seized, the whip fell. A dull thud of a rock hitting the dirt meant the end. Grese stepped forward and began the beating. The stones were just the beginning. While Grese used heavy rocks, Irma Grese preferred a different weapon. She didn't use her hands, she used a wolfhound. The animal lived in luxury. It ate better than any prisoner in Bergen-Belsen. Grese would stand by, watching the beast tear through human flesh. Witnesses like Dora Silberberg saw it happen daily. In one instance, Grese struck Silberberg across the face with such force that her teeth flew out of her mouth. Silberberg's teeth hit the mud. She couldn't scream. Grese then signaled the dog. The wolfhound lunged at Silberberg's friend, sinking its teeth into her leg and dragging her across the dirt like a rag doll. Helena Copper confirmed the hierarchy of hate to the court. Grese was the most despised guard in the camp. She didn't just watch, she participated in the mechanics of the Holocaust. She stood beside Dr. Mengele during selections. She pointed fingers. She chose who lived and who went to the gas chambers. The defense was simple. Volkenrath and Grese sat in the dock with cold, empty eyes. They showed no remorse. Volkenrath admitted she held a supervisory role, but denied choosing people for death. She claimed she was maintaining order. She told the court the conditions were hard for everyone. She compared her discomfort to the experience of people starving to death. Grese stood her ground. She looked at the judges and denied every single allegation. The projector whirs in the sudden silence of the Lüneburg courtroom. 1945. Irma Grese sits motionless. She should know better than anyone the weight of the evidence. After all, she once snapped at the prosecutor. "I should know better than you whether or not I had a dog, don't you think?" The lights go out. A beam of white light cuts through the gloom. The film begins to roll. On the screen, British bulldozers push mountains of tangled limbs into mass graves. Skeletal survivors crawl through the mud of Belsen. The camera captures the exact moment of liberation. Spectators in the gallery begin to weep. Two people collapse. One man rushes for the exit, physically ill. The defendants watch. Grace's face remains a mask of stone. No remorse, no flinching. She watches the footage of the unimaginable suffering she directed as if it were a technical manual. For her, the starving prisoners were just figures in a ledger. When her sister testified earlier, Grace cried, but only for herself. Johanna Grese watches too. She still clings to her story. The dog was just a pet. The witnesses are all lying or mistaken. She admits to slapping the disobedient, but denies the sticks and the fangs. She claims she tried to resign from the SS in 1943. The tribunal doesn't care. 3 years of torture followed that supposed letter. The defense is a crumbling wall of denial. Dozens of witnesses provided consistent, interlocking testimony. The documents are signed. The film is undeniable. The arrogance of the Beast of Belsen has finally hit the ceiling of a British military court. On November 17, 1945, the 2-month marathon of horror reaches its end. The guards are led back into the room. The president of the court announces that the verdict is ready. After months of denial, the tribunal delivers its verdict. No mercy, no clemency. The words cut through the courtroom air like a blade. November 17, 1945. Lüneburg. The list is short. Joseph Kramer, Elisabeth Volkenrath, Irma Grese, Irma Grese. 11 names in total. 11 death sentences for a camp that employed thousands. 11 out of 3,000 staff. That is less than 1%. The court acquits 14 others for lack of evidence. 19 get prison time. But for the core 11, 8 men and 3 women, the road ends here. There is no appeal, no last-minute reprieve. The British military government rejects every petition. The logistics of death begin. The 3 women move to Lüneburg prison. Behind stone walls, the illusions of the master race finally crack. They wait. They listen to the keys rattling in the corridor. December 8, 1945. The prisoners leave Lüneburg. A convoy moves toward Hamelin prison in Westphalia. Hamelin is a town famous for the legend of the Pied Piper. Now it prepares for a different kind of clearing. 2 more war criminals join the group. 13 gallows are ready. Britain has already sent its most efficient tool for the job, The guards locked the cells at Hamel. 11 doomed souls stood for the sins of thousands. The tribunal handed down the sentences, but the numbers tell a different story. Justice was a lottery. How many guards actually paid for the horrors of the camps? Fewer than you could fit on a single bus. The SS machine was massive. 37,000 guards operated the death camps. 10% of them were women. 4,000 female Officerinnen. Most never saw a courtroom. Most never felt a rope. 37,000 guards. Only 11 deaths here. The scale of the escape is staggering. Imagine a small city. Every inhabitant is a guard, a clerk, or a killer. After the war, this city simply vanished. They didn't go to prison, they went home. They became teachers in village schools. They raised children. They bought groceries and tended gardens. For decades, they lived long, quiet lives in the heart of Germany. Their files gathered dust. Their crimes became secrets buried under floorboards. These 11 were the exception, not the rule. Thousands of their colleagues died of old age in warm beds. To execute the chosen few quickly and without failure, the army summoned the leading specialists from London. Why bring a hangman from Britain? German methods did not suit British justice. The Nazis preferred the slow agony of the short drop or piano wire. The British demanded a clean break of the neck. This required engineering. Albert Pierpoint was the tool for the job. 40 years old, a professional since 1932, he had already ended over 200 lives in Britain. Now, the army gave him the rank of lieutenant colonel and flew him into the ruins of Hameln. He did not come to judge, he came to calculate. Pierpoint stands in the new execution chamber. Royal engineers have just finished the work. He tests the lever. It moves silently. He checks the hinges of the trapdoor. They are freshly greased. The gallows is a double-frame design. It allows two prisoners to stand side by side. It is a factory setting for the end of life. Pierpoint is famous for his speed. 10 seconds. That is all he needs. From the moment a prisoner enters the room to the hollow bang of the trapdoor, 10 seconds pass. It is faster than brewing a cup of tea. His assistant, Richard O'Neill, stands by with a clipboard. He speaks fluent German. He is the bridge between the executioner's math and the prisoner's fear. On December 12th, the engineering begins. Pierpoint must weigh and measure every woman. Gravity is his only weapon, and it requires precision. A drop that is too short leads to slow strangulation in the dark. A drop that is too long will tear the head clean off the shoulders. In London, guards would provide these numbers. In Hameln, the hangman trusts no one. He picks up his brass tape measure. The first door opens. Elisabeth Volkenrath enters the room for her final measurement. Pierpoint needed more than a rope. He needed math. Before death comes the ledger. The executioner transformed the three women into a set of technical parameters for his equation. Accuracy was the only mercy available. 1 inch of error meant either a slow strangulation or a decapitation. Elisabeth Volkenrath stepped onto the scale first. She was 26 years old, 5 feet 3 inches tall, 130 pounds. She stood motionless. The needle on the scale settled. Pierpoint noted the figure in his book. He calculated the drop, 7 feet 6 inches. Why did he bring a specialist from London? German hanging methods often relied on short drops and slow death. British justice demanded a broken neck in under a second. Next came Irma Grese. She was the youngest, only 21, 5 feet 5 inches. Pierpoint watched her face. Grese was laughing, a sharp, chilling sound in the sterile room. She treated the measurements like a game. She couldn't grasp the reality of the next 24 hours. Johanna Bormann stood behind her, a total contrast. Bormann was 52, though the records claimed 45. Only 5 feet tall, barely 101 pounds. Her hands shook as she stepped onto the metal platform. The arrow on the scale flickered. "I have my feelings," she whispered in German. It was the first crack in the SS facade. Pure, documented terror. Pierpoint finished his calculations. For Bormann, the drop would be 8 feet 2 inches. The math was complete. The guards led the women back through the stone corridors. The heavy steel doors clicked shut. While Pierpoint calculated inches, those in the cells counted the hours. 13 prisoners waited. 3 women, 10 men. They sat in small stone rooms along a single corridor. At the very end of that hallway stood the execution chamber. Only a few heavy doors separated their beds from the trap door. The prison did not sleep. All night, the air carried the mechanical sounds of the end. Heavy boots clicked on the stone floor. Guards moved in shifts. Then came the sound that cut through everything else, the trap door. The executioner tested the mechanism repeatedly. A heavy thud echoed through the pipes and walls. It was a rhythmic, metallic reminder. With every drop of the wood, their lives grew shorter. Rumors filled the morning. Some say Irma Grese, Elisabeth Volkenrath, and Johanna Bormann sang Nazi anthems until dawn. Others heard sobbing. Both versions likely happened. Pride usually breaks when the rope is ready. Brigadier Patton Walsh took his position. He was the British officer in charge. Beside him stood Miss Wilson, the deputy governor of Strangeways Prison. They were there to ensure the bureaucracy of death remained precise. The math was simple and cold. The men would die in pairs to save time. The women would face the noose alone. The sun rose on December 13, 1945. Everything was prepared. The ropes were stretched. The trapdoor functioned perfectly. The first walk began at exactly 9:34. Pierpoint's calculations met reality at 9:34. The official record names Elisabeth Volkenrath as the first to face the drop. History remembers her as the Oberaufseherin of Auschwitz, a former hairdresser who ruled thousands with a whip. Now she was just a body in a queue. Why inject poison into a dead woman? 30 seconds after the fall, a doctor plunged a needle filled with chloroform directly into her heart. The British military had a problem with the clock. A clean hanging breaks the neck, but the heart is stubborn. It can pulse for 25 minutes after the trapdoor opens. In a standard execution, the body hangs for a full hour. Pierpoint didn't have an hour. He had a list. The execution chamber door opened. Volkenrath walked with her hands pinioned. She stood on the wood. Pierpoint pulled the white hood over her head. He adjusted the noose. The knot rested behind her left ear. A second later, the lever moved. Volkenrath dropped through the floor. The rope snapped taut. Under the gallows, the air changed. The sharp medicinal scent of chloroform filled the cramped space. The doctor waited exactly 30 seconds. He delivered the injection. The heart stopped instantly. The machinery of justice had become an assembly line. This procedure turned a slow death into a clinical transaction. By neutralizing the heart, they cleared the rope for the next prisoner. The guards removed the body. Pierpoint reset the trapdoor. 10:03. 29 minutes later, the cell door opened for the most famous prisoner of the day. At 10:03 a.m., Irma Grese stepped toward the gallows. She was 22 years old, the age of a university graduate, not a mass murderer. The beautiful beast met her end in a clash of accounts. Some guards reported a breakdown. They spoke of a girl who had to be dragged, of sobbing that filled the corridor, of a frantic kicking struggle against the inevitable. Pierpoint remembered it differently. He saw her walk calmly. He heard a single word, schnell, quickly. The executioner worked with mechanical precision. He placed the white cotton hood over her face. The fabric hid her features, the youth, the blue eyes, the cruelty. The trapdoor fell at 10:03. Irma Grese became the youngest woman executed under British law in the 20th century. At 10:38, the guards returned for Johanna Bormann. The contrast was total. The woman who once used attack dogs to tear prisoners apart was gone. In her place stood a 52-year-old former missionary. She limped down the hall. Her body shook with violent tremors. She had heard the trapdoor hit the frame twice already. She had heard the bodies drop. She knew the exact sound of the silence that followed. Pierpoint saw pure terror in her eyes. There was no defiance left. Only a haggard old woman facing the mechanical end of her 7-year career in the camps. The noose tightened. The lever moved. By 10:38, Johanna Bormann was dead. The morning shift was half over. 3 women were dead. Pierpoint shifted gears. Efficiency became the priority. The gallows didn't stop to breathe. With the 3 women dead, the executioner switched to pairs. Double drops, double speed. The math was simple. The work was industrial. 12:11 p.m. Joseph Kramer, the Beast of Belsen, walked to the trap door. Beside him stood Dr. Fritz Klein. One managed the camp. The other selected who lived and who died in the Auschwitz gas chambers. The lever pulled. They fell together. The conveyor belt of justice accelerated. Peter Weingartner and Georg Kraft were next. Then Franz Hausler and Wilhelm Dohr. Then Ansgar Pitchen and Franz Stoffel. 2 by 2. The sound of the trap door became the rhythm of the afternoon. 13 war criminals, 7 hours. The final drop happened at 4:17 p.m. It wasn't a ceremony. It was a clearing of the books. Pierpoint and his assistant had dismantled a hierarchy of terror in a single shift. The bodies hung for 60 minutes, exactly 1 hour of dead weight before the ropes were cut. Contempt followed them into the dirt. No names, no elaborate funerals. Guards carried the coffins to the prison courtyard and buried them in the mud without a single word or marker. The erasure became permanent 9 years later. In 1954, West German authorities dug them up. They moved the remains to Amel Cemetery in Hamelin. They chose a remote corner, an empty field of weeds and tall grass. No gravestones exist there. No memorials were built. Today, the ground is just a patch of anonymous earth. When the ropes were cut, one question remained. 13 bodies lay in the Hamelin prison yard. For some, this was the ultimate victory of law. For others, it looked like a calculated slaughter. Was it justice or just the winners taking revenge? The answer lies in the choices they made. Elisabeth Volkenrath and Irma Grese stood on the trapdoor. Their defense was a single phrase. They claimed they were simply following orders. It was a standard line for the SS, but the court rejected it. A uniform does not grant a license to kill. The world decided that following orders is no defense when those orders involve systematic torture. Nuremberg would hang the top Nazi leaders only a year later. These women were the first. Their age mattered little to the hangman. Grese was 22. Volkenrath was 26. Youth does not excuse mass murder. Ordinary backgrounds do not justify extraordinary cruelty. They made a choice every single day. They chose to beat prisoners who were too weak to stand. They chose to unleash dogs on the dying. They chose to send thousands to the gas chambers. Even as Germany collapsed, they never stopped. Mercy could have saved their lives in those final days. They chose terror instead. The gallows in Hamelin killed the women, but it didn't kill the reason they existed. December 13, 1945, Hamelin Prison. British executioner Albert Pierpoint looks at his watch. 3 women wait for the trapdoor. Irma Grese, Elisabeth Volkenrath, Johanna Bormann. They were not born monsters, they were shaped. What turns a neighbor into a killer? Scientists would later call it the Milgram effect. Authority gives a command, ordinary people obey. Accountability vanishes. The poison enters the social fabric. It starts with words, then laws, then a whip in a woman's hand. 13,000 corpses lay unburied when the British entered Bergen-Belsen. This was the result of the machine. The process of dehumanization is mechanical. First, you strip a group of their names, then their clothes, finally, their right to exist. Grese and the others were cogs in this engine. They traded their humanity for the raw, intoxicating high of absolute power. Pierpoint pulled the lever. The drop was calculated. The necks broke instantly. Justice was a rope, but the scale remains uneven. On one side, 3 bodies in unmarked graves. On the other, 60,000 survivors struggling to breathe in a landscape of ash. The executioners lost their lives, but the victims lost their futures. The 13,000 dead at Bergen-Belsen never saw the sunrise on a free Germany. Irma Grese had a face for cinema. Elisabeth Volkenrath looked like a strict aunt. Johanna Bormann was a middle-aged woman from next door. The gallows in Hameln proved one thing: evil doesn't need horns, it needs a uniform and a paycheck. The horror of these women wasn't in their deaths, it was in their lives before the camps. Grese was a nurse's assistant. Volkenrath worked in a hair salon. Bormann was a domestic servant. Ordinary lives. Then, the system changed the rules. It rewarded the whip and punished the bread crust. It turned the subhuman into a target and the guard into a god. Some resisted. A few guards risked the bunker to pass a message or a potato. But these three chose the dark. They discovered a hunger for the absolute power of the watchtower. It started with a small compromise. A single blow, a turned head. History shows this path is a straight line. The transition from a shopgirl to a killer requires only two things: permission and a victim. Bergen-Belsen proved that once the constraints of law vanish, the monster is ready to wake up. In 1945, the world watched three ordinary women walk toward a rope they had braided themselves. Grese took the first step onto the trapdoor. The story that began with pharmacy scales ended at a gallows in Hameln. It leaves behind a single, cold warning. 1945 marked the end of the line for the women of Bergen-Belsen. But the sight today is different. Today, Bergen-Belsen is a place of silence. No barracks remain, no wire. Only mounds of earth marking mass graves and the quiet rustle of trees. It looks peaceful. That is the trap. Evil does not always wear a monstrous face. It starts with small compromises. A choice to look away. A choice to follow an order. Irma Grese and her colleagues were once ordinary. They were young. Some were called beautiful. Then they chose to become cogs in a machine of death. The mechanism is simple. Dehumanization begins with words and ends with a rope. History proves this cycle repeats. It happened in the woods of Germany, and it waits to happen again wherever vigilance fails. The women executed in Hameln were not born as demons. They were manufactured by their own decisions. Every day offers the same choice on a smaller scale. We choose to resist or we choose to participate. 1945 was not the end of the risk. It was the demonstration of the cost. The final choice belongs to those who watch. The next Irma Grese is never a stranger. She is someone who simply stops saying no.